Hi everyone and welcome back to Vote 17. My name is Jess Bell. This is a student-produced election series where every Friday we interview different politicians about issues that are important to young voters. Today on the show we have two candidates from the Opportunities Party. We have Abe Gray representing Dunedin North and Lindsay Smith representing Dunedin South. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. So first of all, I just want to start by asking you, what made you choose the Opportunities Party and what made you decide to run as the candidate in your electorates?
I was at a risk really of turning into a grumpy old man, and I thought, I've got to get off my bum and do something. And when you had a look around, the Opportunities Party was the only party that really offered a way forward in the true sort of sense of sustainability. So when you looked at economic sustainability, they actually had really good job prospects. They had things that were going to make businesses thrive. When you looked at social sustainability, they had programs and action plans to look after the poor people that we've got growing in New Zealand, prison populations. And of course environmental sustainability, they are the only party that have got fully costed out real action plans that we could put into place tomorrow.
Yeah, I've been an advocate for youth in North Dunedin and kind of a community organizer for a long time, and I've sought to represent the voters of North Dunedin, usually for the Legalized Cannabis Party. For me, cannabis legalization is one of the most important social issues in this country that we haven't tackled yet. And I was really just waiting for a major party to come along with resources that would actually stand up for cannabis legalization. And that hadn't happened yet until this election with the Opportunities Party, and their cannabis policy is head and shoulders above anything else that I've seen from other parties.
Cool. So the Opportunities Party in the last Colmar Brunton poll was at 1% of the party vote, and in News Hub's Reid research it was at 2.1% of the party vote. Do you think there's still time, we're 2 weeks out of election, do you think there's still time to reach that 5% party threshold?
Of course, the standard politician answer is that the only poll that counts is the one on the 23rd. But having said that, the Colmar Brunton, which a week ago had us at 1%, yesterday had us at 2%. And if the Reid research had us at 2% and doubled to 4%, we're getting close to the 5% that we think we need to get cut through and to make a difference.
Okay, so what do you think is the biggest barrier that is stopping or is in the way from getting to 5%?
Well, based on what I've seen on the ground since I've been involved with the Opportunities Party, this type of political polling isn't reflective of the whole electorate reality. It might be reflective of people who have landline phones or people who have voted in the past, but we're going after people who have never voted before, young people, people who aren't young but for other reasons haven't voted. So we're activating a whole different group of people who really aren't picked up in the polls. And when you look at the margin of error of those polls, because of what I've just mentioned, that margin is underrepresenting our true vote. So if you add that margin in, we're well over the 5, and that's what I'm seeing on the ground is a lot of people who are interested.
Okay, some people say that voting for a minor party is a wasted vote, obviously being what would be classified as a minor party. How do you feel about that? Do you think that it is a wasted vote, voting for a minor party? Or?
Well, in my history as a candidate for the Cannabis Party, we always targeted that wasted vote, no pun intended there. But it's never a waste when you vote your values, and the Opportunities Party actually has a chance. So I'm used to going in it with no chance, just telling the truth and making the points that need to be made when no one else is doing it. And I'm willing to do that. But now I'm doing it again, supported by a huge infrastructure of a very serious party with very serious people, and the groundswell that we're seeing, we're confident that we're going to get over 5. But even if we didn't, worst case scenario, whatever percentage we get, it shows that these issues that the Opportunities Party has brought to the fore matter to a significant number of people. I mean, the Legalized Cannabis Party got 0.5% every time, no matter what. And that was enough to show people that it was an important issue. And that's why, I was looked at as a good prospective candidate, because I represent, a significant constituency. So if the Opportunities Party can show we represent a significant constituency, which we already have, then we're going to get other major parties adopting our policies. That's already happened during this election because they're running scared. And we're here for the long haul. So even if we don't get 5 this election, we definitely will next election. But I think we'll all be pleasantly surprised this time.
And I think people are waking up to the risk of voting strategically. You know, look what happened in America, what happened with Brexit and things like that. People voted for something they didn't really want to keep out something that they didn't want even more. And it backfired on them time and time again. And I think as we get close to election, people will put 2 and 2 together and make that. Why would you vote for something you didn't want? Just to keep them out.
You're right. I mean, speaking of the past electoral upsets in other countries that we've seen recently, for people who don't like what the media tells them to think, or people who want to think for themselves and really have the policy contest judged on its merits, we're the only option in New Zealand. There is no, wild card other than the Opportunities Party.
And I mean, that is a bit of a negative for us. We're not a party where you can understand the policies easily. We're not very good at sound bites. Despite the charm of Dr. Morgan, we're not getting our message across with smiles, and people actually have to stop, read the policies and understand them. And for lazy voters, we don't appeal. For young voters, I think there's a huge appeal, and what we feel is that people, A, that are media savvy, B, that are on the internet and have got the time to look at things, are picking up an entirely different message. And as Abe said, they're the ones that aren't getting polled by anybody, really.
Okay, so talking about the media, tonight is the minor parties debate, but unfortunately Gareth Morgan will not be representing the Opportunities Party because you guys have not polled at the 3% and there is no current seats being held in Parliament. Do you think that's a fair representation of all ideas and values in New Zealand society?
No, and I think as Gareth himself said, and the reason that he went to court, this is about democracy. This is about, in a true MMP environment, everybody being able to have their say and put their point of view forward. And it'd be frightening to think, if back in whatever it was, 18-something or other, when Seddon tried to start the Labour Party, if the paper hadn't given him any coverage because he didn't have any votes or seats in Parliament. I mean, we have to be able to listen. That's one of the joys of MMP.
And it's such a double standard. I mean, when you have a fake party like United Future, even when Peter Dunne was in there and they got time, now he's thrown in the towel. And they're still letting this guy that no one's ever heard of participate. I mean, I think Gareth has a little bit more pull than Damien Light, and it's not really fair that they're including them and not us.
Absolutely. So now we're going to head a bit more into policy. So first I would like to talk about the Opportunities Party's universal basic income policy. So it has been proposed income of $200 per week for those aged 18 to 23. What social issues will this tackle, if any?
Well, at the moment, I mean, we've got really high youth unemployment. There's basically like an underclass of youth that have no prospects. We hear National talking about them pejoratively, saying they won't pass drug tests and that's why they're so hopeless, which is shocking and horrifying. But there is this dispossession. There's a lack of opportunities. The future is changing rapidly. So for people who do go into study, you think about, what would be a good thing to study to get me a good job? By the time you finish your degree, it's not even a good job market for it anymore. And what I've seen a lot of when I was a student is when you're coming out of school and you don't have any economic prospects, if you can't find a job, sometimes the only way to have any income is to enroll in tertiary study or training to go to uni or polytech, but you're not really doing it because you know what you want to do. You're just doing it because you need a way to get any income to live. So is this the best way of tackling it, or is it just the easiest? Well, I mean, basically that's what I was describing just before is a really inefficient way of figuring out what you want to do, racking up a university debt or using your allowance entitlement when you're still figuring stuff out. So what this does is gives everybody 18 to 23 the allowance entitlement. And they can go start a business, they can pursue music, they can do art, they can follow their dreams, figure out what they really like, and then hopefully at some point they'll say, okay, this is what I love to do, I'm gonna go into tertiary training or study, and then they'll be able to use all the normal structures to pursue that. They might still have some of their UBI left over, or they might get loan or allowance later in life, but they're gonna know what they wanna do and they're not gonna be just casting around using up that entitlement to try to figure out what they want to do.
Okay, so policies like this are very expensive. So why not work more on the already existing targeted?
Because it's such a disincentive at the moment. And the way that the whole welfare system is set up is penalises people who go on the welfare system, and it makes it really, really difficult for a young person, as Abe said, that's struggling to get into work and out of work, gets a part-time job to get them some work experience to get that big tick that you need, and then the benefit gets cut.
Yeah, I mean, the way WINS is working now, basically, we're paying a huge amount for WINS administrators to basically humiliate all of us, or StudyLink. You know, it costs more money to have all these managers finding ways to stop giving people money than it would to just give everyone the money. And this has been studied, and it is actually cost more to administer these massive, schemes with different criteria than just to give the money to everyone. But don't mistake that this is replacing welfare or student support. This is just for people 18 to 23. Targeted welfare is still going to be there for people who need it, who this isn't enough for them to live. And student support is still going to be there for people who need more, or for people who are older than 23 who come to study.
So can you tell me exactly how it's going to be funded?
Well, this is a really good, this is leading into your next question, but what the Opportunities Party proposes, the centerpiece of our policy, is tax reform. And essentially by taxing more the richest 1% through a wealth tax, and Lindsay will explain more of this in a minute, we have a whole lot of extra revenue that we can do tons of incentives like a UBI.
Okay.
And I mean, the other thing to be absolute, people struggle with the idea of a UBI, but I get one. I mean, I get nearly $400 a week from everybody. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to fill out any bits of paper. I do it once, and I get that. Why is it okay for me?
You're talking about superannuation.
Yeah, and I don't need it. Why is it not okay for the youth who do need it to get it? So coming back to the tax one, because I think that, for me, is one of the keys. And there's been a lot of recognition lately that we're doing it wrong, that we've got a huge reliance on income tax, and there's a whole lot of other stuff sitting out there we're not taxing. And what Labor and National are both proposing is the idea of a capital gains tax, which means that, say for someone like me, I retire, I've got all this money that I've saved and I want to set something aside for my next few years. So I go and buy a house. I buy a $300,000 house, and if I sell it in a year's time for $400,000, I pay tax 33% on that $100,000 as a capital gains tax. So currently under National, if I keep that house for 2 years, I don't pay any tax at all, because they've set a 2-year test. Now Labor are proposing to extend that to 5 years. So my $300,000 house, I keep 5 years, I don't pay any tax on it at all. And because if I do nothing and just leave it sitting empty, I still get the capital gains out of it. I don't pay any tax. So the plan for me is to just buy a house and leave it sitting there. And if people think that doesn't happen, this was one of the aha moments for me in the whole getting it to be grumpy. The Herald did a big research at the beginning of the year, and everybody said that they needed 30,000 houses to be built in Auckland to meet the need that was up there. And you go, that's fine, so Labor and National, everybody else is proposing to build lots of houses. But what nobody said except the Herald, and no one's ever made a fuss about it, there are 36,000 houses sitting empty. The people like me that have bought and go, I'm not going to have tenants getting in there and wrecking them, I'm just going to sit there and farm it for the capital gain, tax-free. There's 36,000 houses sitting empty in Auckland.
And basically what Lindsay's describing is, because there's these tax havens created by not subjecting certain things to tax, you're incentivizing people to do a certain thing. If you ask any reputable financial advisor, hey, I have extra money, I'm not sure what to do with it, put it into property. You're going to get the most return. You're not going to have to pay any tax. And that's just the logical thing that any smart person would do. But if everybody does that, it inflates a massive property bubble. And that's what's happened now. And
we're all fighting each other. All us old age pensioners have got a few bucks. We're all fighting each other to buy houses, dragging the next people up and go, oh, I've got to get in, I've got to get in. And we're creating this huge industry of buying houses off each other. I mean, it's not real. So what the Opportunities Party is proposing is first thing is a 30% drop in income tax. And that's funded and more by bringing in a wealth tax. So I do the same thing. I buy my $300,000 house, and suddenly I've got to pay 1.5% tax on that house every year. So $4,500 every year I've got to pay out of my pocket. So I set this aside for my retirement, and so I've got to get something to get some money back to pay the $4,500. It's either got to come out of somewhere else, or I've at least got to rent the house out. So that helps. 36,000 houses are now back on the market as rentals. Or I go, no, this actually, the rate of return's not that good, I'm going to get out of housing. So you put the house on the market, and even if 12,000, a third of the houses went on the market, that's more than National built in the whole of last year. So simply by bringing in a wealth tax, it sends the completely different signal. So I can't sit there with a dead asset. It has to start working for me, either as a rental property or I get out of the market. But the real thrill of this for me is, so here's me sitting there with my $300,000, a year later or whatever it is. So what am I going to do with it now? I'm not going to go and buy houses because that's a crap investment. I'm going to invest it, either put it in the bank. So suddenly the bank now has got $300,000 that they can loan to a business. House market's been destroyed. It's sitting stagnant because no one's getting out of houses. So the bank's now got to give that money to somebody, or I can invest in a business. And when I was young, that's what people did. You didn't buy houses. You had a mum and pop business, and you hired the kids next door, and you created jobs, and that's what's killing us.
It's been this hollowing out of the productive economy by, like I was saying, if every financial advisor is advising every single person with money to put it into property, no one's investing in small businesses, and so the economy's grown. Labour and National have been able to, claim and be correct that the economy's grown, but it hasn't been more productive. It's just property values that are growing, and it's not small businesses that are being started and creating jobs, and that's why we have more unemployment despite the economy having grown.
So I think my question is so this show is targeted predominantly at young voters, and as a student myself, I know that in the future I do want to own my own home, but it's kind of unfeasible for me to even think about that right now. So I think what I would like to know, or what young voters would like to know, is this tax scheme that is being brought forward by the Opportunities Party. How is that going to make that process easier and that transition smoother?
Well, I think what Lindsay mentioned, but what we need to emphasize more is this wealth tax is accompanied by a massive tax cut for income. So it's shifting the burden of taxation from income onto assets. And basically, if you think of, if our tax base has to fund all of the services for our citizens and infrastructure, and you're only getting that tax base out of the income that's generated, as opposed to if you think of all the land and all the assets, if that's like the collective wealth of New Zealand, then it's only fair that the people who have it share a little bit, and that forms that pot of money that we use to dole out services and infrastructure. So when you have an income tax, it's basically the more someone works, the more they're going to contribute to this tax base. But with a wealth tax, it's the more you've accumulated, it's the more you're going to contribute to the tax base. So instead of taking people on $150,000 and having their income tax go up to 40%, which really gives them less incentive to work because they're working harder and taking home less, we're going to give them a tax cut. But we're not going to just slash services and infrastructure. We're going to make up for it and more with this wealth tax. And that's really going to mean the richest 1% are contributing the most to that tax base because they have the most.
But there's also some direct benefits, and there was someone on the radio even yesterday with one of these startup IT companies, which is really the future of Dunedin. I mean, we're not going to ever start manufacturing coal ranges again and things like that. But this guy was saying that there was no hope of him raising the capital he needed to start his business. He had the bright idea, he had some backing, the people that if he could create the product, but he can't, because when he goes to the bank and says, can I borrow $100,000 to get the startup going, the bank's saying, oh no, we're lending it to all these people to buy houses.
Okay, so thank you for talking about tax. And we're going to move to something that's a little bit more prevalent in Dunedin society. So love it or hate it, the consumption of alcohol is quite large here at the University of Otago.
Yes, it is.
So the Opportunities Party's proposition is to increase the age of purchase to 20, but maintaining the legal consuming age at 18. What's the logic behind this policy? Is it really necessary, and would it improve society?
Well, it is counterintuitive to young people, to restrict the access to alcohol, especially, here in Scarfy land. But we know alcohol is harmful. I mean, even people who are very enthusiastic about Scarfy culture will have to admit to themselves that they've seen some of the negative effects on them or their peers. Everybody knows someone who's been negatively affected by alcohol. And this dovetails with our cannabis policy, which I know we're also going to talk about, but it's really, we need to introduce some principles of equivalence. So if we have harmful substances that alter the mind, it's okay to take them, but you do have to have some regulations and restrictions around them. At the moment, there's hardly any regulation or restriction around alcohol. It's way too available. And we know from, physiological science that your brain is still developing until you're 25. So in an ideal world, no one would be using mind-altering substances until their brain is fully developed. That's not really realistic, but we do want to sort of raise the age of onset as much as possible, especially for heavy drinking.
Do you think it's a bit confusing, though, to the general public, having two different ages? Like, why not just raise both ages, both the purchase and the consumption, to 20?
Well, in many ways that could be a good idea, but I don't think the people who are under 20 would necessarily like that. And we have to accommodate everyone. They're all voters. We're not just here to tell people what's best for them. We can just try to educate them and encourage them. And basically what we have now, when the age was dropped from 20 to 18 back in the 90s, what it essentially did, there was still lots of people, who were 18 who drank. And even back then, if you went into bottle stores, the retail people felt a bit bad and would usually sell to you anyways. But now that it's 18, it's pushed that de facto age where people can access alcohol down to 15, 14. So we need to kind of lift that back up. So by having a purchase age at 20, obviously people who are at uni, a lot of them have friends that are 20 that could just go to the liquor store, buy some, and give it to them. That will not be a criminal offense. We know that's going to happen. We have to allow for it to happen. But by putting the purchase age to 20, we're at least starting to address alcohol harm. And we do want to consult with the public on a formalizing of a split purchase age, where only for off licenses that you would have to be 20, and in bars and restaurants you could be 18. And that was mooted when we had a discussion about alcohol reform as a country a few years ago. So we're open to moving towards that type of arrangement.
Okay, awesome. So we've talked a bit about it throughout this interview already. Your entire career, you've been very passionate about cannabis reform in New Zealand. The Opportunity Party planned to legalise and set the legal age of purchase and use at 20, but ensure there's education campaigns to discourage use till 25. How do you plan on achieving that, allowing use at 20, but educating to not?
Well, like I said, we're not here to tell people what to do. We want to inform them, we want to educate them, and we want to let people make their own decision. Prohibition doesn't work, so having it setting it at an unrealistic age is not really gonna. There's no point in legalizing if a lot of the people who want to use it are still under prohibition, essentially. But we do want to educate them, and delaying onset of any mind-altering substances as long as possible is what's going to be best. But many people choose to do otherwise, and so we think they shouldn't be criminalized, and we think there's a huge opportunity for New Zealand of a whole new industry. I mean, I was just over in Colorado and California, and all the science graduates there are employed. There's heaps of commerce. It's a whole new layer of industry that's based on cutting-edge horticultural science. So it's a perfect fit for the New Zealand economy.
Do you think the discouragement of using, though, is realistic, or is it just kind of idealistic?
Well, what's idealistic and unrealistic is prohibition. Anything's going to be better than what we have now. So it may be slightly idealistic and unrealistic, but much less so than trying to maintain prohibition.
Because one of the downsides at the moment, and we don't talk about it a lot, is that if the market's being controlled by gangs and criminal activities it is at the moment, because it's a criminal substance, then they're pushing the use to the thing that's going to make them the most profit. And marijuana doesn't make them the most profitable. That's why we're seeing the huge boom in P, is because the market's being controlled for marijuana. You've got to grow it, you've got to put a lot of time and effort into it. You can cook up some P relatively simply, and by them controlling that, they're pushing away from something that's actually quite, you know, I won't say okay, but it's quite natural, to something that's absolutely disastrous.
Safer alternative.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So as the Opportunities Party representatives, in post-election coalition negotiations, what are your policies and stances that you will not budge on as the Opportunities Party? Like what are those issues that are really important?
I was going to say something, but I won't. We don't have any bottom lines like that at all. Okay. What we're simply saying is that we're not left, we're not right. What we've got is a whole range of policies, and after the election we will simply sit down with the party that says, I'm interested, and bargain. And because we're seeing, as Abe said, we're seeing particularly the Labor and Greens picking up some of our stuff, and if we could just get them to tweak it 2 steps more, we could go and work with them. We've got National who are saying we need to develop economic activity. And if they could pick up some of our tax reform, we'd go, we're not stuck on any black and white
Whoever gives
tribal.
us the most policies.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's kind of off-putting to potential voters, though, that they don't know what side Opportunities Party could go with?
Not at all, because they know where we stand with our policies. And what good is changing the government if you don't actually change the fundamental policies that are at the root of these crises that we have in New Zealand? If you're not going to legalize cannabis, if you're not going to move to a wealth tax, if you're not going to bring in a UBI, then what are you changing other than some sort of cosmetic facade?
Yep.
Okay. Can you guys explain to me in a minute or less why young voters should vote the Opportunities Party and why it's best for us?
Well, we want a fair New Zealand. We want young people to have a chance. We want you to be able to own a home. We want to create new industries. And we're based on evidence. So it's not a popularity contest, and we think that people should look at the policies and see what fits with their values and vote on that.
And I mean, I'm obviously thinking about my children and grandchildren as, you know, when you get to my age, and I'm just not happy with the way New Zealand's going, either the national direction or the Labor Green direction, because what you seem to be able to have to pick between a good economy and a good environment. And I don't want to be able to have to pick that. And I think a young person voting today should be able to have both. And the Opportunity Party is the only one that offers a good economy and a good environment.
Awesome. So we'll hold things there on the interview side of it, but we like to conclude each interview with a set of quickfire questions. Are you guys ready for that?
Sure.
Awesome. So the first one's for you, Abe. What do you think's the best aspect of Scarfy life?
Well, just that melting pot of young people from all over the world who are open-minded. I mean, yeah, my greatest friends I made as a Scarfy, and I continue to meet more amazing people every time I'm in the campus area. And to have a beacon like that in Dunedin of people from all over the world who are young and open-minded and cool and sharing their experiences, it's just what makes Dunedin great.
But I think it's a great disappointment. I started doing a Masters this year, so I'm a student, and I haven't been invited to any student parties.
I'll get you invited.
Awesome. So we'll go on to the second question. So Lindsay, what's the issue that you care most about this election?
It would have to be the tax reform, because of all the flow-on effects that come out of that. It's until you get that right and you stop this business of some people getting very, very, very rich. Because that whole dream that we thought we were bringing in the 80s, that if you had a lot of rich people, they'd spend the money and we'd all get some, it's just not happening. So we have to reform the tax.
Awesome. So Abe, if you could eradicate one species from New Zealand, what would it be?
Well, I'm actually a botanist, so I did my undergrad and master's in botany, and there's a horrible little weed called Hyraceum, and no one would ever really notice it, but it's just spreading all throughout central Otago and really changing the color of our landscape.
Awesome. So Lindsay, if the Opportunities Party leader Gareth Morgan was an animal, what animal do you think he would be?
This is going to sound I think he would be an elephant. Very kind, very intelligent, but when he puts his foot in it, he puts his foot in it properly.
That's a really good analogy.
And I won't say anything about his ears.
So Abe, what annoys you the most about the current political climate?
Well, I would have to say this left-right tribal dichotomy. I mean, like Lindsay said, it's, you know, you see something great on one side, but then it's so sort of beholden to these ideologies that you end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And really what annoys me the most is just political posturing of trying to appear cool or what, you know, you think people will like, instead of just telling the truth and being honest. So that's why I love the Opportunities Party, because they are honest, and you know, they're not afraid to confront elephants in the room like the property bubble or cannabis legalization that might not necessarily be polite to talk about or might be taboo. We've got to confront those.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. If you would like to know more from your politicians leading up to this election, please send your questions into the Vote 17 Facebook page. Next week, we actually have a special, another special interview on a Wednesday. It's at 2 p.m. in Burns 2. We have Chloe Swazbrook that's coming in to talk to us. But as usual, we also have the 1 p.m.'s in a FAO studio. And we'll see you next week. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.